October 1944. A mud-slicked base camp near Nancy, France. The rain is cold, it never stops. A lone sentry stands by the perimeter wire. His eyes are bloodshot. He has been on this post every night for 3 weeks. His hands tremble on his rifle. Nearby, in the warm barracks, white platoons sleep soundly. They rotate, they rest. These men do not. A request for a fair schedule is met with a cold stare. A major says these men belong in the shadows. He says they are suited for the night. He thinks he is clever. He thinks no one is watching the clocks. But George S. Patton is coming. The general does not tolerate a broken watch. He will soon ensure the man who stole their sleep learns exactly how long a night can last. This is the story of what happened when General Patton discovered that a group of black soldiers hadn't been allowed to sleep for 3 weeks, while their white comrades rested comfortably every single night. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We tell the World War II stories that show what happened when one man's prejudice became another man's death sentence. Arthur Clay was 24. He came from the brick row houses of Baltimore, Maryland. He led a platoon of black soldiers in a mixed-unit battalion. Before the war, Clay was a schoolteacher. He believed in the logic of the army. But the war had already taken his brother at Salerno. It had taken his faith in fair play. Now, near Nancy, he watched his men wither. Their eyes were yellowed with fatigue. Their hands shook when they cleaned their rifles. They were being hollowed out by a schedule that had no end. Clay had submitted 3 formal requests for a rotation. Each one was ignored. He stood in the cold mud and watched his soldiers shoulder their gear for another night without sleep. Major Donald Creech was 39. He came from Davenport, Iowa. He was the battalion executive officer. Creech was a man of firm, narrow convictions. He spoke often of what he called the natural order of things. He believed black soldiers possessed an inherent aptitude for the night. He called his schedule a matter of maximizing efficiency. Creech lived in a heated command trailer. His boots were polished to a high glass. His uniform was pressed and smelled of starch. When a white platoon leader complained about a single night of guard duty, Creech changed the roster immediately. He gave them 2 days of rest. But for Clay's men, the major remained unmoved. He saw their exhaustion as a lack of character. He held the power of the watch, and he used it to keep 30 men in the rain for 3 weeks straight. The month was October 1944. The Allied advance across France had slowed to a crawl. The race for the Rhine was now a slog through the Lorraine mud. It was a time of cold rain and thinning supplies. The German army was retreating. They were fighting for every hedgerow and bridge. In the American camps, the pressure was immense. Officers were tired. Men were breaking. In this atmosphere of constant movement and mounting casualties, the fine details of military regulation often vanished. Local commanders held absolute power over their little patches of dirt. The army was a segregated machine. It operated under a system of Jim Crow that crossed the Atlantic in the hulls of troop ships. Because of this, a man like Major Creech could operate in the shadows of the bureaucracy. He was the one who signed the duty rosters. He was the one who decided who slept and who watched the wire. Higher-ranking officers were often too busy with fuel shortages or artillery coordinates to look at a guard schedule. They let things slide. They allowed personal bias to masquerade as tactical necessity. They accepted the idea that some men were simply better suited for the grunt work, the night work, and the dangerous work. It was a quiet rot inside the ranks. It was an efficiency built on the backs of the exhausted. Other commanders saw the bloodshot eyes of the black platoons and looked away. They chose the path of least resistance. They chose to ignore the violation of the manual because it kept their own lives simpler. Back at the muddy camp near Nancy, Lieutenant Clay watched his men prepare for another night of rain. Captain Samuel Miller, 32, from Chicago, walked into the battalion command trailer. He was the S3 operations officer. He held a clipboard with the week's duty roster. The air inside smelled of coffee and cigar smoke. Major Creech sat behind a folding desk. He was looking at a map of the Moselle River. He did not look up. "Major, we have a problem with the guard detail," Miller said. Creech tapped a finger on the map. "There is no problem. Lieutenant Clay's platoon has been on the perimeter for 21 straight nights," Miller said. "They are doing their job," Creech replied. "The white platoons in B Company are rotating every 3rd night," Miller said. "That is by my order," Creech said. Miller stepped closer to the desk. "The men are physical wrecks. They look fine to me when I see them at noon, Creech said. They haven't had 8 hours of sleep since September, Miller said. They have the day to rest in their tents, Creech said. The camp is active all day with trucks and drills, Miller said. Then they should learn to sleep through the noise, Creech said. Army Regulation 21010 calls for an equitable rotation of all details. Miller said, don't quote the manual to me. Captain, Creech said. I am asking you to put them back into the standard rotation, Miller said. The answer is no, Creech said. On what grounds, Major? Miller asked. On the grounds that I have found those men are naturally suited for the night, Creech said. That is not a tactical justification, Miller said. It is a biological reality, Creech said. They are soldiers, not shadows, Miller said. They are what I define them to be for the sake of this battalion, Creech said. Their performance is dropping because of physical fatigue, Miller said. I disagree with your assessment, Creech said. I saw one man drop his rifle this morning because his hands were shaking. Miller said, then he should be disciplined for losing his grip. Creech said, he was disciplined by 21 nights of rain, Miller said. Creech leaned back in his chair. He adjusted his polished belt. I am utilizing their natural capabilities, Creech said. And what capabilities are those? Miller asked. They have thicker skin and better night vision than my white boys, Creech said. That is a lie and you know it, Miller said. I want my white soldiers rested and sharp for the push to the Rhine, Creech said. So you're using Clay's men as a permanent labor force? Miller asked. I am using them where they fit best, Creech said. This is a violation of every order coming out of Schaff. Miller said. Schaff is a long way from this mud, Creech said. I cannot authorize this roster, Miller said. I don't need your signature, Creech said. I'm taking this up the chain, Miller said. Go ahead and try, Creech said. The colonel won't like this, Miller said. The colonel is at a conference in Nancy and won't be back for 2 days, Creech said. Then I'm filing a formal report with 3rd Army headquarters, Miller said. Creech laughed. He went back to his map. You do that, Captain. Now get out of my office. Miller left the trailer. He walked through the rain to the communications tent. He did not call the colonel. He called a contact at the 3rd Army Inspector General's office. He described the roster. He described the state of the men. He described the birds. The report reached Patton within the hour. The jeep cut through the mud without a sound. It stopped at the command trailer. George S. Patton stepped out. He wore a high-collared jacket and a helmet with 4 stars. The ivory-handled revolvers hung on his hips. The camp went silent. Men stood at attention. Patton did not look at them. He walked straight into the trailer. Major Creech stood up fast. His chair hit the floor. General, I didn't know you were in the sector, Creech said. Sit down, Patton said. Creech sat. Who designed the current guard rotation for this battalion? Patton asked. I did, sir, Creech said. How many consecutive nights has the 3rd platoon been on the perimeter? Patton asked. I believe it is 21, sir, Creech answered. How many consecutive nights have the white platoon served? Patton asked. They rotate every 3 days, sir. Creech said. Why is there a difference? Patton asked. I am maximizing the natural aptitude of the men, sir, Creech said. Patton looked at the major's polished shoes. You believe you are a scientist, Major. You think you have mapped the biology of my soldiers. You think the night belongs to one race and the day to another. You call it maximizing efficiency. I call it a failure of command. A soldier is a machine that requires fuel and rest. You have denied them both. Fatigue does not check the color of a man's skin before it slows his heart. Exhaustion is a universal tax. It is paid in blood. Lieutenant Clay has seen his men lose their grip on reality. They are stumbling in the mud while your favorites sleep. You are not protecting your white soldiers. You are rotting the discipline of this entire unit. You have created a battalion of 2 classes. One is broken. The other is soft. I do not lead a segregated army. I lead the 3rd Army. Every man in it belongs to me. When you steal the health of my soldiers, you are stealing from my fighting strength. You have done more work for the Germans in 3 weeks than a sniper could do in a year. Now we will correct the record. You will sign a new roster. Every man rotates equally. Clay's platoon will stand down for 48 hours of sleep in heated tents. They will eat hot food. They will not be disturbed. As for you, you seem very fond of the night. You seem to think the darkness is a comfortable place. You will now prove it. You have 2 choices. You can accept a court-martial for dereliction of duty and willful endangerment, or you can spend the next 7 nights on the wire yourself. You will supervise every shift change. You will stand in the rain. You will not sleep. You will be awake from 2200 to 0600. If you close your eyes once, I will break you. Choose now. Creech looked at the 4 stars on the helmet. He looked at the floor. I will supervise the guards, sir, he whispered. The orders were carried out immediately. Lieutenant Clay led his men away from the perimeter wire. They walked toward the heavy canvas tents where diesel heaters roared. They collapsed onto cots and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep that lasted 48 hours. Major Creech did not return to his heated trailer. He stood at the edge of the camp. The mud pulled at his polished boots. The rain soaked through his wool coat until it was heavy and freezing. He watched the first shift change at 10 o'clock. Then the second at midnight. He stayed on his feet while the wind cut through the trees. He smelled the wet earth and the biting scent of wood smoke. His eyes began to burn. His legs felt like lead. Every time his head nodded, a sergeant from Patton's personal staff tapped him on the shoulder. He was forced to remain upright. The white soldiers he had tried to protect watched him in silence as they rotated through their fair shifts. They saw their major standing in the same muck he had used as a weapon. There was no dignity left in his tailored uniform. By the 4th night, Creech was a ghost of a man. He finally understood the weight of the dark. Arthur Clay went home to the red brick streets of Baltimore in 1946. He returned to his classroom and spent 40 years teaching history to children who only knew the war from textbooks. He was a man of quiet patience who never spoke of the rain or the mud to his neighbors. He lived a long and peaceful life, passing away in the winter of 2004 at the age of 84. To his final day, he kept a small brass clock on his nightstand, set to the exact time Patton's Jeep had arrived in that camp near Nancy. It was his silent reminder that even in the middle of a world at war, justice could still find its way through the mud. Major Donald Creech did not stay with the battalion for long. He was transferred to a postal unit in the rear within weeks of his 7-night vigil on the wire. He returned to Davenport, Iowa, after the surrender and lived a life of quiet, simmering resentment. He worked in a local hardware store and spent his years complaining about the loss of the old ways and the lack of discipline in the modern army. He died in 1978, never having understood why a general with 4 stars would care about the sleep of 30 men from Baltimore. George S. Patton never gave the incident a line in his official reports. He folded the original guard roster and kept it in the back of his field desk for the remainder of the campaign. He mentioned the moment only once in a private letter to his wife, describing the sight of an arrogant officer standing broken in the rain. He wrote that a leader who forgets that his men are made of flesh and bone is a leader who has already lost the war. He said that a man who cannot respect the fatigue of his soldiers deserves to be buried by it. Some historians argue that Patton's mirrored punishment was more about showmanship than a genuine commitment to civil rights. They suggest he viewed the situation through the lens of military readiness rather than a moral objection to segregation. Others argue the opposite. They suggest that Patton's swift, public dismantling of the major's authority was a necessary act of leadership that forced the army to acknowledge the exhaustion of its black soldiers. What is certain is that the event secured a legacy of equalized duty. It proved that under Patton's command, the physical limits of a soldier were protected by the 4 stars of the general himself. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have forced the major onto the wire, or would you have simply issued a formal reprimand? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about when one man's prejudice became another man's death sentence, make sure you subscribe. Somewhere in the rain, the exhausted sentry finally slept.